Fury surged through Rory's veins, hot, sharp, and sticky, propelling him down the wintry sidewalk. His reflection hurried along with him, jumping from store window to store window, and packs of other out-of-town visitors parted automatically as he passed. Luckily, his hometown salted the roads that morning, or he would have slipped and fallen on his ass. Well, there was a mental image he didn't need. Himself sprawled on the sidewalk, arms and legs akimbo. "Excuse me," he muttered, orchestrating a fancy move around an oblivious couple who stepped out of one of the tasting rooms before stopping in the middle of Rory's path. Until this afternoon, he'd been able to hold his frustration at bay. Smack up until the inevitable questioning about his life began. As the only child of Audrey and William Hoyle, Rory was expected to meet certain standards. Oddly, it wasn't his sexuality bothering his parents the most, although he thought they weren't happy about it. But he'd never brought a boyfriend home. So maybe they thought being gay was just another phase, which would soon pass. What bothered his folks the most was Rory had zero aspirations to be, in no particular order, a stockbroker, a banker, a corporate accountant, or any career revolving around money. The trouble was, Rory's inner critic reminded him he wasn't satisfied with the way his life was going either, but he didn't know how to change it. Move home? Live with his parents? Nearly 30 years old, no savings, a degree in graphics he didn't use, and gay? His life was a recipe for disaster in a small town like Hollyridge. He shoved his hands into the pockets of his jeans as he walked, trying to keep them warm, reflexively clenching them into fists as he moved further away from his parents' home. The mile walk into downtown had taken him only about 10 minutes. He was so worked up. Up ahead, an older woman stepped out of his way. Rory thought he recognized her as an old schoolmate's mother. He gritted his teeth in an attempt to smile as he passed by her. From the wary expression on her face, he must not have been terribly successful. Main Street in Hollyridge was one very long block on the south side, while the north side was broken into 3 blocks, sort of, where cars could turn in and park behind the buildings, as well as having angled street parking in the front. Main Street was wide. Every time Rory came home, he was struck by the ridiculous width of the street. For a town of only 20,000 residents, Hollyridge had grand aspirations. It was late November, and Hollyridge was festooned with decorations for the upcoming holiday season, as well as the barrel tasting festival put on by local wineries. Located smack in the middle of Washington state wine country, boutique Hollyridge wineries opened up their doors for the first tastes of the coming year's releases, just in time for holiday shopping. A laughing couple, tipsy as hell, stepped out of one of the tasting rooms almost directly into Rory's path. "Sorry," the woman laughed before tugging her partner to the tasting room next door. Rory envied their obvious jubilation. It wasn't that he didn't want a relationship or to be financially stable, but there were things he wasn't willing to compromise, and working a 9-to-5 day job was one of them. Or wearing a suit and tie, not going to happen. Once he reached the midpoint of Main Street, Rory slowed his pace. It wasn't as if he had anywhere to be. He breathed in and released the oxygen back out slowly, the frigid air burning his throat and lungs. He reminded himself his parents came from a different generation, distant from Rory's own. They'd been in their late 40s when Rory appeared in their lives. He couldn't expect them to understand he didn't care about money, but both sets of grandparents had lived through the Great Depression. A deep respect for money seemed to be what his parents had taken from their youth. Maybe Rory wasn't the next Leonardo da Vinci, but at least he wasn't miserable and stuck in a job he hated, or didn't hate most of the time. What the coffee shop didn't pay, he made up in sales of his paintings. "But what about the future?" his mother's question reverberated in his head as he swerved around another group of slightly intoxicated tourists. "How are you going to meet someone special if you're in the service industry?" She didn't even mention his artwork. The reason he hadn't met anyone had nothing to do with his state of employment or balance in his checking account. Rory was alone by choice, also something his parents didn't understand. The few times he dated, his boyfriends, well, if you could call them that, had always tried to change him. They liked his looks, but thought he was wasting his time working at a coffee shop. They didn't understand he was satisfied with where he was in life, and they either pushed him to change or faded away. He supposed it said something about him, too, that he didn't care enough to try and get them to stay. He'd accepted being permanently single. Why couldn't his parents? Rory slowed his steps. Amongst the sea of wine-tasting rooms and kitschy gift shops, he spied something new. At least, new, since the last time he'd been home for a visit. Tucked in between Heidi's Gifts and Blue Mountain Winery was a bookstore, a used bookstore.